Museum and Boyhood Home for our panel on life on the battlefield, our second panel this afternoon. I'm Tim Reeves, the Deputy Director. I'd like to start with this quote that we used last hour that I think really puts the war in perspective. And it's by the late distinguished military historian John Keegan, who wrote that the Second World War is the largest single event in human history, fought across 6 of the world's 7 continents and all its oceans. It killed 50 million human beings, left hundreds of millions of others wounded in mind or body, and materially devastated much of the heartland of civilization. And of course, that largest single event in human history affected the lives of the gentlemen we have assembled here today. And I'll begin our introductions with my fellow Wichita native, Mr. Jack Ford, here on my immediate right. Jack is a retired police officer in Wichita. He arrived on Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944, with the 743rd Tank Battalion. Next to Mr. Ford is Mr. Ray Lambert. Ray was a staff sergeant with the 16th Infantry Regiment on D-Day. At the outset of the war, the 16th Regiment was one of the first mobilized for overseas duty. As we'll see, Mr. Lambert's experience was more than just Normandy, and we just had a wonderful moment right before the panel. You know, I always like showing off the holdings here at the Eisenhower Presidential Library Museum, and so I was very excited to show Mr. Lambert the 16th Infantry Regiment's journal from June 6, 1944, and asked him if he had read it, and he said he'd read it and he had lived it. And to Mr. Lambert's right, we have Dr. Guy Stern, who many of us were fortunate to see in programs yesterday. And Dr. Stern was born in Germany in 1922 and was the only member of his family to have escaped and come to the United States in 1937. He was drafted into the U.S. Army and sent to Camp Ritchie, where he became one of the Ritchie Boys. The Ritchie Boys were largely European Jewish refugees who then returned to Europe and worked in psychological warfare and other intelligence aspects during the war. And there was a recent documentary, which we were also fortunate enough to exhibit yesterday, that I hope you all got a chance to see at another time. And following the war, Dr. Stern became a professor of literature, I believe, most recently at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. I'd like to start with the same question that we did a few moments ago with our home front panel, and that's to start with that key date of December 7th, 1941. Where were you on that date, Mr. Ford? What were you doing? What was your first reaction? Well, I was asking about perhaps your reaction on December 7th, 1941, when you learned that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. I was asking about the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor. Yes. And where you were on that day, and perhaps what your first reaction to that news was.
Well, I remember where I learned. Me and 3 of my friends were out hunting on that day, and we had stopped in at a local golf course north of the city to get something to eat. When we went in, the golf pro was there, and he told us that the Japanese, he was listening to it on the radio, and he told us that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. I knew then, when that happened, it wasn't going to be very long when I was going to be in the Army. And I was, pretty quick.
Well, we'll move on to hear Mr. Lambert's remembrance of that date as well. Yes, thank you.
Can you hear me there?
Yes.
Good. I was in Fort Devens, Massachusetts. I was in the Army. We've been training in Louisiana and Texas, North Carolina, and upstate New York, making landings in Puerto Rico. And we knew that we were getting close to the time that we were going to get involved. So that's where we were at the time, and after that, went to Indian Gap and was quarantined there until we went overseas.
I was in Bristol, England, and I will remember every moment of that. That moment when we had already been given our orders, our team of 6 personnel members were divided into 3 sections. One of us was to go in with the parachutes, the second one on D+1, and the third one D+3. And we had been prepared to fairly well. We had waterproofed our jeeps, and so I went that afternoon to a movie shown in a large tent built outside of headquarters of First Army. And so I will remember a movie that doesn't deserve to be remembered. It was called Shine on Harvest Moon and starred in unforgettable Grace Moore. And all of a sudden the lights went on. The following personnel report to your billets immediately to get final preparations. D-Day has happened.
Dr. Stern, how about your memory of when you first learned that the United States would enter the war after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor? Were you in the Army yet at that time?
No, it was a Sunday that Pearl Harbor happened, and I was studying at St. Louis University and had a Sunday and weekend job as a busboy in South St. Louis. We were hitchhiking with another busboy to our place of employment in South St. Louis. We arrived there, and the owner of the restaurant stood at the door, and he said, "Fellows, turn right back. I will not open my restaurant today. Something terrible has happened."
I'd kind of like to, just if we could, do a synopsis of your military service, perhaps for all of us, up to the time of the D-Day invasion. Mr. Ford, if we could start with you, perhaps about your induction in the Army and then your training in the tanks.
If we could, get you just to talk about being inducted to the Army and then the training you went with as a trooper, and then perhaps about moving over to Indiana and getting ready.
You want me to go over the-
Yes, take us up to the invasion date. From the time you entered the Army up until about June 6th.
Talk about D-Day too?
Yes, sir, go ahead, talk about D-Day.
We got that. We want to talk about when I was drafted.
Yes, sir.
D-Day.
Well, we could start with when you're drafted, take it all the way through D-Day if you'd like.
Well, I'll make this as quick as I can. I don't remember the exact date, but I was drafted in October of 1942. Went to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas for my physical. When I got my draft notice, I was up there 2 days. Wasn't much of a physical. I was warm, and that's about all he had to do. They sent me home for 10 days and take care of any unfinished business I had, which was to tell my employer that I had a government job now, so I wouldn't be working for him. And when I got back to the Fort Leavenworth, then I went to Camp Funston, which is on the eastern edge of the Fort Riley Reservation. There I took my basic training, but I should back up just a little bit and tell you that when we got there, went in on the train, I saw a motor pool full of tanks. And I thought, well, that looks pretty good. You didn't have to walk. I went for my placement interview, and the officer that interviewed me asked me if I had any preference on where I served in the Army, and I told him, I said, I don't know anything about the Army, but I saw the tanks coming in on the train and wouldn't mind that. Well, when I said tanks, he just started writing and stamping my paper. So I found out later that not very many people, some people didn't like serving tanks. They called them death traps. But we went to California then on the maneuvers out at the Desert Training Center. These were light tanks, the M5s, 15-ton tanks that I was in at that time. And we went to the Mojave Desert for Camp Ibis, was the Desert Training Center for the Armored Force. While I was there, sometime, I think it was in September, I got transferred to the 743rd Tank Battalion, which was gearing up to go to Africa. And they transferred me down there as a tank driver, and I found out when I got there that they had the Sherman tank instead of the M5 tank. I'd never seen a Sherman tank. But I remember when we went by truck, and I remember when we got there, the sergeant called out my name and told me to follow him, and he took me to a tent. We walked in and told the tank commander, he said, "Here's your driver." That was it. And we were there, I can't recall, we left there the first part of there, sometime in November we left and went to Camp Shanks, New York. And then we got on the boat in November. We was on that boat 7 days to Greenock, Scotland. And we got there the day before Thanksgiving, the night before Thanksgiving. They get getting on that boat, I was on that thing 7 days, and I was sick 7 days, so I knew I wasn't a sailor. We went down to Camp Shank, New York, and we got there Thanksgiving Day. And to our surprise, our cooks had already arrived. And we had a full Thanksgiving dinner. After the first of the year, the battalion broke up and each company went a different way for different training. My company, B company, went to a lake in the interior of England, Great Yarmouth. When I got there, I found out that we were going to train in floating tanks. And I thought, I don't know who came up with this, and English said a secret weapon. And I wished at the time that they'd have kept the secret to themselves. We trained there, and they were the tanks had a large canvas screen that went up. Oh, I can't remember how tall that screen was. And 2 propellers on the rear of the tank. Yeah, I was a driver, and being the driver, I had to control all these controls. When we drive off into that lake, when it got to floating, then I'd let the propellers down, put the tank in first gear, and just take off. it had a high periscope where I could see where I was going, where I wanted to go. I didn't get there all the time. We were there a while trained on the Valentine tank. Just had a crew of 4, and the Sherman tank has a crew of 5. Then we transferred down to the south part of England and got Sherman tanks called D-Day tanks. And we trained there till the latter part of May. I don't know the dates. Then we drove up to, I think it was Plymouth Port. When we got there, they loaded us on the LCT, landing craft tank, would accommodate 4 Sherman tanks. We loaded right then. My tank was the first one on, so I would be the first one to the last one off. And the company commander's tank was the last one off. We was on the landing craft with him. And I guess I should tell you that D-Day was supposed to be the 5th of June. The weather was pretty well controlling when it was going to be because of the high water, the rough water in the English Channel. But we went out for the 5th of the night of the 4th of June, and we got part way out, and they got orders to turn around and go back. In the process of turning around, our LCT ran into the battleship Arkansas. But we got back, and they, I thought they'd hoping anyhow, maybe, I guess, that they'd take a couple of days to repair it. But the Navy went to work on it, Seabees, I guess they were, and by mid-afternoon, they packed up and told us that we were ready to go, and we went that night. And when we got out in the channel, the water was still rough and sloshing up over the LCT. It was a flat bottom boat, and it was pretty bumpy riding, even with 4 30-ton tanks on it. But usually when you get a bunch of GIs together, they're always talking and laughing, carrying on. But that night, everybody was pretty well confined to himself. And I know I was, because I didn't know what was going to happen. I was just 22 at that time, and I really felt like I was getting ready to live the last day of my life. We had briefings on Omaha Beach, it being the easiest of the 5 beaches, or the least defended. And we were told the Navy would take out some of the guns off of the high ground above the beach. The Air Force would also take out some of the bunkers on there and everything, and we had a general that came down when we were getting briefed, and he even told us that he hoped that we didn't just walk in on that beach and not have to fire a shot. But anyhow, the night we sailed, I finally got up. Being the driver, I got up in the driver's seat and tried to get some sleep, but all I could think of was my family back home, wondering if I'd ever get to see them again. And I don't mind telling you, I was just a kid. Being 90 now, I was just a kid. 92 now, I should say. But I just thought about my folks. I couldn't sleep. I was scared. I don't know what was gonna happen. The next day, when it got daylight, we were supposed to land about 15 or 20 minutes ahead of the main force with elements of the 29th Infantry Division Regiment and the 1st Infantry Combat Engineers Battalion. And they were going to clear out a lot of the obstacles off the beach to make a landing lane for the troops who come in and get on the beach. We were also had been briefed about a sandbar in front of the, well, it's 200 or 300 yards, I'm just guessing now, or feet off of the main beach, or the beach, at high tide, we're talking about. When we approached the coastline, then the Germans opened fire. And that shocked us all because we didn't think it was going to have those guns there. We were told they wasn't going to be there. And the closer we got, and then we got in range, they really opened up on us. And when we hit that sandbar, the LCT skipper dropped the ramp and our company commander went off. He had to know it was on that sandbar, but when he went off the LCT, the rest of us followed. And my tank being the last one off, when we grounded down on the bottom of the water, we were sitting in water. The assistant driver and myself were sitting in water up to our waist. And I tried to raise the tank commander on the radio, but I couldn't get anybody. And so I told the tank commander, or the assistant driver, I said, we got to get out of this thing. It's going to be underwater before long with a tide coming in. And we were both wearing Mae West jackets, but the water was too rough. We didn't launch the DD tanks. We just, when your screen was down, it was just a regular tank, so that's what we ran. But I told him we had to get out of there because it was going to be underwater, and I'll never forget what he looked over at me and he said, well, doggone the luck anyhow. We got out and we inflated our jackets. You could inflate them by pulling 2 cords on each side and it just punctured a little vial of gas in the head. So we made our way from one tank, the 3 tanks in front of us, we made our way from one to the other until we got to the last one, the captain's tank, and he wanted to get in that one. And I said, we can't do it. I said, it's going to be underwater too when we reaches the high tide mark. So he looked at me and he said, well, what are we going to do now? And I said, well, what do you think we're going to do? We're going to swim. So, and luckily I've been swimming practically all my life. I just didn't swim, well, not all my life, but a lot. I was an excellent swimmer, but I've never had to swim with all my clothes on. Mae West jacket strapped to my chest and a pair of high boots on to kick with. But we took off, and it seemed like I'd take about 4 or 5 strokes forward and go back about 2 or 3. Finally, I was getting winded out, so I hung on to found one of those bunkers, or a bit obstacles on the beach. We call them hedgehogs. They were crisscrossed steel. I held on to that thing for a while, and I looked up, and heck, that thing had a mine on top of it. Well, hanging on around on that thing, so I took off again, and finally I got in water shallow enough I could stand up and wade, and I got rid of that orange jacket just as quick as I could. I finally got out of the water. I ran across, there was an overhang on the high ground above, and so that's where I went. I swallowed so much salt water, my stomach felt like it was on fire. It hurt. So winded, I couldn't talk. I was there about a minute, and this assistant driver's name was Murray Orr, and he's made it too, and that's where we ended up. Both of us were so winded and tired we couldn't talk for a few minutes, and when we finally could, he asked me what I thought we were going to do, and I said, well, I'm going to stay right here. Nothing I can do. I don't think we can fight any of them with our bare hands and get out this fight or anything, so that's where I spent D-Day. And I had a panoramic view of the entire, how you phrase it, a bloody mess. They were troops stacking up against the beach, but they couldn't get there were only 2 exits on Omaha Beach that they could get off on, and the engineers were having a difficult time. And we had one of our tanks that had a bulldozer blade on the front of it. We called it a tank dozer. It was helping. But I've got some material with me out in the car that I wanted to bring to show it. We received a Presidential Unit citation, our battalion did that day, and it said we were on that beach 16 hours before we got off of it. We were. I think infantry got off of it a little sooner than that. Maybe some of these gentlemen can tell you more about that than I can.
It's a good time to go to our next veteran, Mr. Lambert, who was also on that beach that day. Well, Mr. Lambert recount his service, which I know extended far beyond before D-Day. And if we could move the microphone over for you, sir.
You want me to go back? How far back do you want me to go? I don't.
Wherever you'd like to start.
Well, I think we will. I'll just tell you that I enlisted in the service in 1940. During the Depression, my parents lost everything that they had, and after high school, there was no money for further education. I had a job that I had gotten in the summertime working with a veterinarian in Chilton County, Alabama. I was the assistant veterinarian. So when I went to enlist in the service, they asked me, of course, what I'd been doing. And I said that I had been the assistant veterinarian in Chilton County, Alabama. So the guy said, good, you're going into medics. Now, you know, that sounds kind of funny to say that. But at that time, in 1940, we still had the horse caliber, and they had to be treated the same as any other soldier. If a horse got wounded or hurt or sick, we also had to take care of them. I took my basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia. I was asked to be in a fighting unit, but I never knew. When I asked that question, I'd be in the fighting 1st Division, the Big Red One. And that's where I ended up, in the 16th Infantry. I was sent to medical school in Denver, Colorado, and I ended up there being a surgical technician. And I'm skipped through some things I don't think are too important for you. We were and as I told you, in Indian Gap, after our maneuvers all over the United States, to quarantine there, and I was sent with an advance detail to England, and I was on a British ship called the Bedford of England. Bedford. And all we had to eat on there, as you know, at that time, the British was having a very difficult time. And we had mutton and cabbage for breakfast. Now, I'll have to admit that they told us they'd give us a different menu at night. We only had 2 meals a day. So they didn't give us mutton and cabbage. They gave us cabbage and mutton. We landed in Liverpool, and we went by train, narrow gauge train from there to Tidworth, England. It was an old cavalry barrack that the British had used for many years. And the advance detail was made up of myself, of course, with the medics, and 2 men from each company, and 1 commanding officer from the regiment. So we got there and we had to get the barracks ready. When we got into that area, we found out that the auxiliary land service, like it's the same as our WACS, but it was British, ATS they called them. They were in those barracks, and they were going to stay there and help clean up the barracks and stuff the mattress covered with new hay and all that kind of stuff. So the first night there, I told my corporal, I said, look, now make sure you get a bed check tonight. I had a separate room in the place, and so the next morning, when we came, we all got up and he came to me and I said, how'd the bed check go? He said, no one was in their beds. So that was bound to happen, I guess. But anyway, the APS people moved out of there pretty soon, got the place ready, and we met the rest of the division in Scotland. We did landings in Scotland. The rest of the division came over on the Queen Mary, and we did our training up there in Scotland. After that, we went back to England, and we did live fire training. You had barbed wire, you crawl into the barbed wire where they fire live ammunition over you. So we trained to that for a while and then left there, and we made the invasion of North Africa at our zoo. Our first mission was to capture Oran and take Oran, which we did. That was our first getting into really fighting. And we'd been taught, of course, all our life that to do the right thing and you don't murder, you don't kill, you don't do this. So our commanding officer was General Allen, Terry Allen, and he got us all together after the first few days, and he said, you're going to have to kill the enemy. If you don't, they're going to kill you. We had about 7 or 8 casualties going into Oran. It wasn't really too bad. We stayed in Oran for a while and then left there and went on further into North Africa. We had terrible battles at Kasserine Pass and many other battles there where we lost sometimes as many as 70 and 80 guys in an hour. All the evacuating of the casualties was done by Little Bear. We had the aid station sitting as close to the front line as possible because of that reason, so that the Little Bears wouldn't have to carry the guys so far. We were fighting on a hill, 609, just beyond Kasserine Pass. And I went up one night to check on my company aid men, and while I was there, there was a lot of big boulders on top of the mountain. We'll call it a hill, but it's a small mountain, and I was thinking here. And I heard this kind of scraping noise over my head, and I looked up, and a German came down with a bayonet went right through the fleshy part here, took my light field jacket, and fell on the ground in front of me. We had been told that the Germans were picking the medics off with their snipers. We had lost about 6 of our medics. They were shooting guys right in the head. And so we were given permission to arm ourselves. I wore a 45, and we took our Red Cross, Geneva crosses off and over our helmets so that they couldn't see us. If you kill the medics, the morale goes down, and the line troops then know that they don't have anyone to take care of them. So it's a situation that you really don't want to get into. So this guy fell on the ground in front of me. He got up and came at me with a bayonet, and I reached to catch the end of the gun. He pulled it back, and his finger was almost cut off. The scar is still here. So he pulled back again, and when he did, I was able to get my pistol out and shoot him. I wasn't scared. We had you react to your training at that kind of situation. But when he was dead, and I was standing there looking at him, I started shaking and sweating, and just a weird feeling. You know, I'd never killed a person before, and never did after that. I looked in his pockets to get identification so we could report through to the, both sides would do that. They would, you know, so they didn't have a record. I found a photograph about 2-inch square or so, and it was a picture of him and 2 young ladies on there, and German writing on the back. I found out what that was later. That was his sister and his girlfriend. I kept that little picture, and I still have it someplace. And I used to look at it often to remind me how terrible war is. 2 young guys out there trying to kill each other in a battle. But anyway, we continued fighting through North Africa. We naturally won the battle there. We were fighting some of the German best troops there. General Rommel was one of their best generals. He was been fighting the Germans in the desert and pushing them up the coast. And our job was to keep them from breaking out. And so that's why we had so many really bad battles there. Excuse me. We continued on until we won the battle in Tunisia and in that area. And then they told us to take our patches, first division patches off, and have no marks of first division at all. We went back to Algiers, and we were camped there for a while around Algiers. And then we loaded on a troop ship, and when we got on the troop ship and got offshore away, they told us to put them back on. So we put all our first division patches back on, and we made invasion of Sicily at Gila. And that was a little tougher than North Africa invasion. The Germans had us kind of a horseshoe shape. They had 28 Panzer tanks in front of us, and we were trying, it was almost like we had our heel in the water and our toe in the beach. But we continued fighting forward. The guys were putting dynamite patches on his tanks, fighting the tanks with bazookas. And the battleships, we had 2 battleships that were fighting the tanks. They knocked out 3 tanks, and by that time we got C Company and Cannon Company, and they set their guns up and knocked out 3 of the 4 tanks, and the rest of the tanks left. Now what saved us there on that beach was the Germans made a mistake that time. They had their tanks there, but didn't have any foot soldiers. Had they had foot soldiers there with those tanks, I'm not sure we would have made it in. But anyway, we did. When the tanks left, very shortly after that, they brought in 50 loads of foot troops, Germans, and we had to fight our way on through. But we made it on through Sicily winning battle after battle, losing a lot of men, and continuing on through. So we got to Troina, and Troina was very heavily defended. There was a lot of big boulders and rocks. The Germans were all in those, and they had a high ground. So any casualty we had to be carried by little barrels 8 miles through a dry riverbed that the Germans could see down. But we had taken some German prisoners, so we used the prisoners also as little bearers with a guard with them. And it got to a point there that the battle really was not going our way as it should be going. General McNamara, who was the general back in the States then of the Army, came over and he was there, and he came up to the aid station slightly wounded. I don't know if he did it with his fingernail or not, but anyway, we patched him up and got a Purple Heart for it. So when he was there, he asked General Allen, are you going to be able to take Troina? And General Allen said, I'm going to bring the 16th Infantry up. He said, they have what it takes. They'll take that town. So he did. We had moved our aid stations up ahead of the 16th to take care of the troops that were fighting there at the time. So he moved the 16th up, and they went into attack, and they had to get in for miles around because the Germans really had us just sealed off in the front. So the commanding officer requisitioned 100 mules. And they brought the mules in. Took us a while to get them up there because the guy that had the mules wouldn't let us have them until he got paid. So we had to get cash to pay the guy. And we got the mules and packed in the machine guns and the ammunition, all that, in around the ways, around Troina, and attacked the Germans. And there was really a fight going on there. And Major Denholm, who was heading up the 2nd Battalion, had his men up there, and he told them to fix their bayonets. And they fixed their bayonets, and they charged the Germans, and it was a bayonet fight. And we took the town, and soon after that, the Germans had been trying to escape out of Sicily to get as many of their people to Italy because they wanted to keep their fighting men. But anyway, just a short time after that, we had 225,000 prisoners give up. And so we didn't have food for them. We had no way of proving. So they put up a sign, there's this prisoners in here, and had a couple of MPs, and the Germans come in, throw their gun, and walk in and sit down in that area. But after Sicily, we went back to England, and we had to get the replacements there. We lost a lot of men and some of our best men. And while we were in England, we were doing 50-mile marches and also making lands at Slapton Sands. While we were doing the landing at Slapton Sands, we had some U-boats, the German U-boats got into that area and sunk 2 of our ships. We lost 700 really good, experienced guys there. At that time, General Eisenhower put out an order that anyone that mentioned that would be court-martialed. And so, naturally, we didn't say anything about it, but they did recover a lot of the very important people that were on those ships. Some of them were officers that had been involved in planning for D-Day, and no one really knew much about D-Day. And they were frightened to death that the Germans might get one of those guys and get them away from there. After that, we continued our training, and we continued, of course, doing more landings. We had a fake army in England that would look from the air exactly like an army should look. They had cardboard tanks, plywood tanks, everything they get looked like big balloons there. But they also let the word out, and we had double agents working. One of the agents was a German agent, but he was really working for us. And so they let the word out that Patton was going to lead that army on the invasion. And of course that didn't happen. On D-Day, as Jack has said, we didn't go, we stayed on the ship the night of the 5th. Then the convoy, when we started the convoy in, we had 5,000 vessels of different sorts. The first ones going out in the convoy were the minesweepers. And the Germans had mined the channel, and so the minesweepers were ahead. We went out, we anchored about 3 o'clock in the morning, 10 miles off the shore. And I was in the first wave, and we were to land on the beach at 6:30. They had 28 tanks that they had on LCTs, and they were supposed to start firing, get in and start firing at 5:30. The battleships were firing in, and we had 540 something planes that were going to come over and bomb the beach. They could not do it because of the low clouds and visibility. Afraid they would bomb us where we would come in there. And the artillery, the battleship, their big gun, had to raise their firepower when we started going in at 6:30. And they were firing over the beach. They didn't really hit in where they should. They fired over the beach. They did kill quite a few cows back in that area. So we had to go down the nets on the ship. The waves were about 4 to 5 feet high. Some think they were a little higher. But we went down the nets and got into the picket slope. They were open on the front. And we had to be very careful getting in there because you could break your legs if you didn't get in just at the right time. So we loaded without any problems, my group did. We had 31, may I have a sip of water?
Certainly.
You'd think if I'd been in all that water, I wouldn't want any. Thank you. Now, if I say something that you don't believe, you can look it up on a computer. But anyway, if you ask a question of me and I don't know the answer, then you just aren't going to get it, are you? But anyway, we went in. As we were going in, we see guys floating in the water, and we had orders not to stop to pick up anyone. They did have boats that were going around and picking the guys up if they could. The boat on our left got hit by, I would say, artillery, because the Germans were firing 155 and everything that they could throw at us out there. But they held their machine gun fire. Now, 800 yards off the beach, the dry beach where they had the shales, little rocks about this big around, the Germans had put in all kind of obstacles, as Jack mentioned, obstacles. Between those obstacles, they had French gates, which are iron gates and things out there, and these were to try to keep the boats from getting in, our landing craft to getting in. They had mines. They had over 100,000 mines in the water out the distance. The beach was 4 miles long, the one that we were involved in. Now, Jack had mentioned Omaha Beach. We had sand mock-up tables on the troop ships as we were coming over in the convoy to look at those. Omaha Beach was the heaviest defended beach of all, and that is why Eisenhower wanted the 1st Division to spearhead or make that invasion in the first wave, because we had made 3 invasions. The Germans had 12 bunkers in front, like this, in the distance in front. Those bunkers were 6 feet thick of concrete with reinforcing rods. They had machine guns that they could fire out, and many of them had the 88s that they could fire right on us. Now, so we had this. Coming in, first thing you had to do is to get in so that they could get you in close enough that you could get out. Once they let the ramps down and you went off, you had to get through more barbed wire. You were then over 300 yards of open beach. They could see us just as plain as I can see you guys. They were up on the side of the hill, dug in with machine guns, and then across the road, the beach road, there was a tank trap that the Germans had put in, just wide enough that tanks would they'd filled it with water, so the tanks would get into that and be stuck. So beyond that, then you had more barbed wire. And so you had to cross that beach of 300 yards. Then you had to get through the first barbed wire. And then you had to get through the tank trap. And then you had to get through the next barbed wire. Now just beyond that, on the hillside, was the German machine gunners. And like Jack had said, they didn't really let us up on us until we got in where they could. When we got close enough in with the landing craft, we could hear the machine gun bullets right on the ground. Sounded just like hail. I had been through 2 invasions and I knew what to expect there. But there's nothing else you can do but try to do your job. And so I talked to some of the replacements and I said, when you go off, go under the water and crawl as far as you can under the water. For the German, I knew what they were going to do. They would be firing just at the top of the water. So we got in through the obstacles, and when the ramp went down on my boat, like the 31 guys, as I said there, the machine gun bullets started coming right in on us. I was shot through the arm. There were 7 of us that reached the beach. 4 of us were wounded out of 31. Now, when I went off the boat, I went under the water and for a little distance, and then I came up, and by then there was guys floating, because our boat was not the only boat in that way. The other boats were coming in, and not all the men on my boat were medics, so that would have been a big mistake to get all the medics on that one boat. But I went under the water, even I had a bullet through my arm, and I knew that I had, first of all, I had to get the guys out of the water before I could treat them or do anything for them. So I started pulling the guys out of the water. One guy was hung up on barbed wire. And I went back and was cutting him off there because his straps were all tangled in barbed wire. And I got his straps cut and just about trying to pull him out of there. I had my arm kind of around him. He got hit with a bullet and it killed him right in my hand. So I continued on working. I had to let go of him because there were so many there. I didn't know whether they were dead or not. They were just floating. So I let go of him and went to another fellow, and he was alive, but he was drowning. So I got him, and I was pulling him out to get him out to the beach. Now don't forget, we had to go over 300 yards of that to get there. And there's nothing to get behind out there, nothing at all. There's one big, we call it a boulder, a rock, if you will, on the beach, but it's where the Germans, I think, had too much concrete for something and dumped it there. So I was trying to get the guys to that big rock or boulder to get them behind there because there was some protection there at the time, but it wasn't full tide. So I got hit again. I had I call it fragmentation, went into my left, behind my left thigh, and knocked a hole about 2.5 to 3 inches in there, right to the bone. And so then I went on out, and I had to get out of the water, so I went to the beach, I put a tourniquet on it, gave myself a shot of morphine, and continued trying to help the other guy. I told one of my men that I was Raymond Lepore, corporal, that I was getting very weak, and I didn't know how much longer I could go. And no sooner had I told Raymond that he got a bullet right through the head and fell on me, dead. So I just had to continue on. Now, as I said, some of the medics were killed, and then the company 8 men were with the company. So there was no way to set up an aid station on Omaha Beach at all. Matter of fact, the firepower there was so great that the boats coming in could hardly get in, and the waves were pushing them down towards Utah Beach in that area. So I was continued on and working, and I was getting weaker and weaker. Then the next wave come in. G Company's boat, first boat, came in just to the right of where I'd come in, and every 31 guys on that boat were killed before they got off. None got off. 31 dead right there. Now that's when things started piling up, as Jack said, and the guys were getting so many dead on the beach that the equipment was not being able to come in, and the other boats were getting done. So they did get a bulldozer in. It might have been Jack's tank with a blade on it, but they got a bulldozer in, and they pushed out a ditch right off the beach area, very near the beach, but off the beach area, and all those guys were put in that ditch and covered up. Later on, they were given a proper burial in there, were put in the American cemetery, some were sent back home. That was the first cemetery in France in World War II, the one down by the water. I was still working, and then it was getting about 2 hours, or 2.5 hours, and I had found one of my men that he was doing a good job in working. Iorio was his name. So I had knew that I was not able to go much further. So I told him to try to get all the men together, the wounded behind that rock, so that when the regimental came in with the aid station, that they could then get those guys to get to the aid station. So I went back in to get another guy out, and I got a fellow that had lost his arm, and the waves coming in, and his arm was trying to go out with the waves, and every time it did, he would reach for his arm. Well, I got him, and the arm was really off, and he couldn't do much for that, so I was trying to make a decision where to just let go of the arm and forget about it and try to save his life, but he died. He died before I could do anything like that. So then I went in, one more time, I went in to get the guy. And I got the guy, and you have to get him around him like this and try to get the equipment off so you can drag him in. It's hard to drag him in, especially when bullets are flying all over. So I got him, and the next wave was coming in, and they both were being pushed around, and when that boat came in, I don't know why he came in that position, or maybe I was in his position, but anyway, when he let the ramp down, it hit me right in the back and crushed the lower part of my back. Well, I didn't let go of the guy that I had, even though it pushed us under the water. And I crawled out with the guy. I crawled out to the beach area and got out there and passed out. And the next thing I knew, I was in England in the hospital.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. Dr. Stewart, our time is running out so rapidly. Could you give us a history of the Ritchie boys, who were such a unique unit, and then also about your experience of landing on D-Day+3, what you observed 3 days after what Mr. Ford and Mr. Lambert have described?
Yes, the stories you have just heard are such proof of heroism that I will just lift out some of the incidents in my career in military intelligence and from Normandy onward, and tell those stories, how we tried to ease the way for the troops that were ahead of us. Because military intelligence is trying to anticipate the effort of the enemy and thereby avoid as much as humanly possible the casualties of which you just heard. These are heroic tales. I make observations frequently and try to put them into a larger context. The gentleman, Mr. Lambert, who just spoke, he wears a medal here that is the French Legion of Honor. That is the highest decoration that France can bestow. And I'm honored to be sitting next to this gentleman. I ought to say, as a more abstract observation, this is a generous and deserved gift of the French government, that our liaison with the French was not always that smooth. Now, one of the things we were informed of is that when the invasion was to come about, that we would use intelligence, a prearranged signal for the French underground, so that they could be inserted into the invasion effort. And I still remember the slogan that we used. It was a line from a poem of Rimbaud, Le violon a un son, un ton languissant, which has nothing to do with warfare at all, but it alerted the French, now we are striking, help us, strike loose. Also about French-German, French-American relations, there was, General de Gaulle had organized some of the French resistance and later the first French army, and he was very tough to deal with. So he had devised a uniform with the symbol from the part of France, Lorraine, and so he had the cross of Lorraine. And Churchill at one time quipped, he said, "The hardest cross I have to bear is the cross of Lorraine." How did it look for us on D+70? We had to get our vehicles and ourselves from Bristol to Southampton, which was our launching city. And so the streets of Southampton, every street, every alley, was one vehicle within 1 inch to the next. We were completely taking over one city in England, a fairly large size. And one of the observations I made in myself, as well as in fellow soldiers, as you go to face danger, that you try to hold on to as much of your ordinary pattern of life as you can. And there was a striking symbol. Parked right behind me was a Jeep with a captain as a driver and occupant, and he looked spiffy. He had a uniform on which I think was tailor-made. So he went into the house in front of which he was parked and came out with a hot helmet liner of water. And what did he do? He started shaving in the streets of Bristol. So the owner of that house came out, and in typical British accent, which I'll try to imitate, he said, Sergeant, you don't think this gentleman was ever dreaming he would be shaving in the streets of Bristol, do you? So this was the situation for days upon days preceding us and afterwards in a preparatory city of warfare before we hit. I will lift out one part of our intelligence work because it was striking and it was memorable. Until 1945, our job was to get strategic information, and later on we were told as well to get the goods on war criminals. So through a strange coincidence, one of the really big-sized gangsters fell into our hands, and we unmasked him. And his name was Dr. Sugar, and he had killed 25,000 people by morphine injections, and we were able to get all the evidence, and he was tried and executed. There was some of the parts, the time is really rushing onward, so if you have questions on our intelligence work, I think you have gotten a wonderful panoramic view of the careers of two heroic fellow soldiers, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stern. We do have a few minutes for questions. I'll bring the microphone around. Okay, if you would ask the question, and I'll repeat your question into the microphone, rather. And now they've been resolved. Does anyone have a question from the audience for any of our panelists? See what
I just wondered if Mr. Ford had been reunited with his tank at some time, or how he was reunited.
Did you hear him, Jack?
No. Did you ever get reunited with the tank you lost? Did you ever get back with the tank you lost, or did you go to a new tank? Yes. Would you like to talk about it? Oh, just what happened after you lost the first tank and how you got to it?
All four tanks on the LCT that I was on were lost, and so I had to ride a supply truck for about a couple of weeks before I got a replacement tank. I didn't like that supply truck because it was carrying mostly gasoline and ammunition. And one sniper bullet. And probably if I was good enough, I'd be shaking hands with St. Peter, I guess. But I finally got another tank, and then we had to get another crew because of the four tanks crewmen, 20 men on the four tanks, 12 were killed, 3 wounded, and 5 of us survived. So we had to get another tank crew, and it was about 2 weeks. I had a second tank knocked out at the Battle of Mortain when the Germans launched a massive counterattack with Panzer divisions. But we all got out of that one safely. Well, not safely, I got burned and hit on the arm, I guess, with a piece of shrapnel.
Another question from the audience?
No question.
No, it's another question.
Well, thank you all for attending it. Thank you especially to our veterans.
Thank you.